What if I told you that the real reasons behind Verstappen's clash with Russell were not broadcast on television, but they were recorded on the internal radio of the team? What would happen if you discovered that Max not only caused the clash, but he dictated the strategy that put it in that position? What we witnessed in Tour 63 of the 2025 Grand Prix was not simply an aggressive maneuver between two elite pilots. It was the culmination of a dramatic sequence that began long before the impact between Max Verstappen and George Russell in Curve 5 of the Barcelona-Catalunya circuit. At first glance, the collision looked like the typical rubbing product of a defense to the limit. But days later, recordings of Red Bull's internal radio were leaked that were not transmitted in the official signal, and those recordings completely transformed our understanding of the event. Because what was lived as a career action, in private it was revealed as an execution calculated by Verstappen, with an emotional and strategic load deeply rooted. These private communications, now declassified, began with a direct order from the engineer Gianpiero Lambiase of Verstappen. "Max, can you let Russell pass? Let it pass." It was not a suggestion. It was an order derived from current regulations after the departure of the safety car, at which time Red Bull and Mercedes disputed key strategic positions. Verstappen's response was instantaneous and full of rage. "He simply took me out of the track." There was no pause, there was no containment. What followed was a tense exchange, with Lambiase remembering, "But those are the rules." And finally, a visibly resigned Max that said, "It's a shame, but those are the rules." At that moment, the Dutch did what was expected. He slightly released the accelerator, open so that Russell could pass. Everything seemed to follow the protocol. But what came later was an unexpected and devastating action. Verstappen, just a few meters after allowing overtaking, stole the accelerator again suddenly and calculated, generating a direct collision with the Mercedes of Russell. It was not a calculation error. It was not a failed defense maneuver. It was a motor reprisal, a retaliation with real consequences. The TCAM chamber of the Verstappen car, which at that time pointed back, showed nothing in the official transmission. But the recordings extracted directly from the archives of the car, combined with the telemetry data, confirmed what many already suspected: that Max not only breached the order of his team, but used that same order to orchestrate a maneuver that would allow him to express his anger with controlled violence. The context cannot be ignored. Verstappen is not a rookie. He is not a pilot without emotional control. It is 4 times world champion with a surgical understanding of the regulation, career strategies, and the gray areas of the sport's regulations. Your decision to accelerate just after overtaking cannot be separated from that experience. He was aware that he faced a penalty, but still executed the action. Perhaps as a way to send a message, both to Russell and his own team, that no one pushes him without consequences, that he will not simply be a passive actor within the wall strategy. This act cost him expensive. He received a penalty of 10 seconds and 3 points in his supericants. The most alarming, it is now only 1 point of an automatic career suspension, an unthinkable scenario for a pilot of its status, but completely plausible given the recent accumulation. And yet, the greatest consequence is not numerical. The greatest consequence is the crack that opens between the public narrative of Red Bull, that of order, that of professionalism, that of respect for the regulations, and the internal reality of a team that increasingly seems to operate based on its star pilot, even when it openly challenges its guidelines. The incident of Tour 63 was not simply a touch between rivals. It was a declaration of intentions, a demonstration of power. A reminder that, in Red Bull, Max Verstappen not only drives the car, conducts the team. Beyond the incident on the track, the story takes a much deeper dimension when we immerse ourselves in what happened before that crash. The moment in which Max Verstappen, in full phase under safety car, suggests on the radio a change of tires that would later be decisive for its drop in rhythm and its subsequent frustration, exposes a much more worrying pattern within the structure of Red Bull. Because we are not facing a pilot who simply runs instructions. We are facing someone who, from his consecrated champion position, has become a figure of authority parallel to the wall. Max not only drives the car. Max actively participates and often imposes on strategic decision-making that define the course of careers for the entire team. During Tour 55, when the abandonment of Andrea Kimi Antonelli and the career address is produced, the safety car deploys, a key window for alternative strategies opens. At that time, Verstappen does not expect indications. Take the initiative and launch an application with total determination. Do we have another game of tires? Would make a difference. Fresh tires. This is not a casual suggestion. It is an instruction disguised as a question. an elegant but firm way to take control of the strategy from the car's cabin. Gianpiero Lambiase does not argue. It has no alternatives. It only responds with immediate obedience. Okay, Max box and confirms pit. Strat 12 in Pittsburgh Lane. The sequence says much more than it seems. First, it reveals that within Red Bull a dynamic has been established in which the pilot has an almost total direct influence on career decisions. Second, it confirms that this influence can go against the global tactical evaluation of the equipment. Because the change to hard tires, in theory designed to endure until the end with consistent rhythm, turned out to be a disastrous choice in the restart. With the rise track temperature and direct competition in softer compounds, Verstappen became, in his own words, a sitting duck. He had no defense against the upper rhythm of Mercedes and McLaren, and his frustration was climbing back until he exploded in contact with Russell. The real problem, however, is not the bad tire decision. It is who took it and how it was executed without filter. The structure of a Formula One equipment is designed for each strategic decision to be the product of multiple layers of analysis. Simulations, telemetry data, climate modeling, long round yield, estimated wear. But here, all that machinery was annulled by a comment of 8 words from cockpit. Verstappen's influence is not simply an advantage in terms of trust. It is a concentration of power that unbalanced the tactical architecture of the team. This is not the first time Max acts as his own strategist. Over the years, its relationship with Lambiase has been marked by moments of tension, open disagreements, even clashes in full race. And yet, the team seems to have adopted a functional submission posture. Tolerate that internal pressure in order not to break the balance of a binomial that has given them championships. But now, that same structure begins to show signs of fragility. Because when the most influential paddock pilot begins to make decisions that harm him, and no one within the wall has the authority to contradict him, we are facing a dysfunction that can put in check not only isolated races, but the viability of the team as a contender to the title. What happened in Spain is a symptom. The symptom of a leadership model focused on a figure that no longer operates as a pilot, but as an entity in Red Bull. And that model, however brilliant that has been in the past, is showing worrying cracks in 2025. Because the same man who has led to the top can, without control, become the origin of his decline. It all starts with a structural change that has eroded the core of power within the team. Since the storm caused by the Horner case in 2024, the team has lost more than administrative stability. He has lost internal authority. Key technicians have left, engineering cohesion has weakened, and, most worrying, the sports hierarchy seems to have blurred. In the midst of that void, Verstappen has assumed a broader role, not only as a pilot, but as an operational leadership figure. But that load also has consequences. Because when decisions do not go well, there is no one else to blame. Verstappen's frustration is not just a product of a bad career. It is the reflection of a continuous process of competitive deterioration. After losing the construction championship in 2024 and becoming evidenced in the face of McLaren's technical advance and the Ferrari resurrection, Red Bull has entered a dynamic of desperate reaction. The RB21, although competitive in straight lines, presents structural weaknesses in high load and low traction curves, something that has been evident from the first tests. The alarming thing is that, according to internal sources, Max has been called to participate in the technical meetings of the team to comment on the development of the car, in an attempt to align the project with its pilot needs. This, far from being a sign of collaboration, reflects a clear lack of direction from the high command of Milton Keynes. The precipitous replacement of Liam Lawson by Yuki Tsunoda, after only 2 races, is not a simple sports decision. It is another symptom of disorganization that dominates the environment. The team justified the movement in terms of experience, but actually responds to panic for bad results and the pressure to show a forceful reaction. In this context, Verstappen is increasingly exposed, surrounded by a structure that no longer seems to be up to its ambition. Internally, his figure generates a mixture of respect and fear, but also of uncertainty. To what extent is it willing to stay if he feels that Red Bull can no longer offer him a dominant car? The signals are clear. Radio tensions, the lack of strategic cohesion, repetitive errors in boxes, improvised decisions from the wall, everything points to a structure that is struggling to support its image of authority. Verstappen, which for years was the symbol of Red Bull's success, is now caught in a narrative that positions it more as a victim of disorganization than as its solution. And that ambiguity is wearing it. Not only physically or competitively, but emotionally. What happened in Barcelona was a breakdown. The moment when the most dominant pilot of his generation demonstrated, not with words, but with actions that he can no longer contain his frustration. Russell's blow was not just an instinctive reaction. It was a message to his team, to the commissioners, to the entire world. Things in Red Bull are not working. And if they do not change soon, what we saw in Spain is not an exception, but the beginning of a much deeper disintegration within what was once the most powerful structure of Formula One. Because at top, the margin of error is minimal. And Red Bull today is walking dangerously on that line. The incident with Russell, beyond its sports and regulatory impact, showed something much more serious. That Red Bull has yielded so much control to its star that it is impossible to contain it when things do not go as planned. The strategic decisions that normally arise from a collective evaluation process were dictated by a single man from the car's cabin. And when that strategy failed, there was no self-criticism or course adjustment, but an instinctive, emotional, and destructive reaction. This not only raises questions about the sustainability of this management model, he raises doubts about the future of the team as a whole. Because a successful Formula One project cannot depend exclusively on the talent and will of a single individual, however exceptional it is. It needs organizational coherence, it needs defined limits, it needs a culture of shared responsibility. And at this time, Red Bull seems to have lost the balance between the author's authority and the power of the pilot. The most disturbing of all this is that it is not an isolated incident. The pattern is repeated: improvised decisions, lack of internal cohesion, growing media pressure, and a technical structure that no longer responds with the surgical precision of yesteryear. What happened in the Circuit of Barcelona-Catalunya could be just the first of several episodes where Verstappen's frustration explodes on the track. And if that happens, the damage will not only be sports, it will be institutional. Because every time a pilot challenges the team without consequences, the credibility of the team erodes a little more. Formula One does not expect anyone, and the teams that do not evolve are left behind. Red Bull is at a crossroads. You can recover control, restructure your leadership model, and find a functional balance between Verstappen and team management again. Or it can continue to slide through a slope where individual talent is no longer enough to win, and where internal cracks end up destroying what was once an unstoppable dynasty.